Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Emotional Man podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have with us Shikhin Argawal, who is the founder and CEO of StatsLateral. He's also been part of 7 successful startup teams, including 2 as a co founder. He's also a father of 2 daughters and a dog. Welcome to the show, Shikhin.
Thank you, Joseph.
Tell us a little bit about StatsLateral. This is a company that you founded and you're a CEO of. When did it start and what's its purpose?
StatsLateral is about 3 year olds now. I provide product strategy and management consulting service through StatsLateral. We are leveraging my experience in the tech industry, specifically within the product management function that I have progressed my career throughout my career. And then we have a small team which helps companies solve some of the hard problems through technology.
Okay. And what was the idea? Why did you start this in the first place?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of being in startups is so there's a benefit and there's a downside, but it all adds up to why I started StatsLateral. It's a very fast-paced industry, and as you can see on my profile, which is in public, say on LinkedIn or something, I've been part of 6 to 7 different startups, and except for one of them, they all successfully moved to the next milestone, got acquired, and so on and so forth. With that, I'm able to run with that pace and acquire new knowledge and skills very quickly. So that's definitely very rewarding, something I really enjoy. On the other hand, it's not similar to a large company, a corporate job where you can find the stability of the job in the business for 5, 10 years.
Mhm.
And so that's the downside. You're constantly, for some people, it could be stressful. For some people, it's part of life. And so, with that intent, when I look at StatsLateral, it's obviously applying those modern skills, specifically with business strategies and technologies. And then it is also the fact that things will continue to move as fast as we have seen over the last 10 years or 20 years. And so companies need help or enterprises need help in terms of keeping pace with that change. And so that's the genesis of StatsLateral.
Our audience, they're all business owners or business leaders, either small businesses, startups, corporates, all different kinds and sizes of companies. But for those who aren't very familiar with the startup life, can you share with them what's it like to be part of a startup, especially a tech startup? W- How many hours are you working? What does your day to day life look like?
Yeah. So my experience with tech startups is, first of all, the day to day life cannot be measured in terms of how many hours one has to work. For the most of my experience, everything was very goals driven, very KPIs driven. It's a modern management setup. Eventually, me and my manager will have, and my team and my extended teams will have an understanding of what type of objectives we are going after, what are my KPIs for the month or the quarter. And with that, I set my own pace and obviously have to meet my objectives to be able to survive and thrive in these roles. At some point, it can be, you can be spending like 80 hours a week, and sometimes you are fine with 40 hours a week. What some of the benefits when it comes to to just the work-life balance of the number of hours you're working in tech startups is that there's less of fluff. People are, at least in my experience, people tend to be more direct. They're all task oriented and then resolve problems faster. You're not having meetings for the sake of meetings. Like generally speaking, I would not support to set up meetings with 10 people to just provide a project update. We would prefer, I would, in my experience, 8 or 9 people out of 10 will prefer just receive project updates through an email or a Slack or something to discuss something which requires the open discussion across different people and so on and so forth. So it essentially reduces that level of formality, which in larger companies, sometimes you still have to go through. And essentially, we save a lot of time and then gain efficiency mainly by having less fluff in startup teams. So that's definitely beneficial when it comes to the day-to-day activities.
We've heard a lot in the media about Silicon Valley culture where it's really easy to just be working constantly and really risk burnout. What has been your experience been
Yeah,
with burnout, personal
obviously,
health, things of that nature?
yeah. Yeah, I've personally not experienced burnout, but I would say starting my first company at the age of 24, I was near burnout at a young age because I was ambitious and I wanted to learn as much as possible and do as much as possible. And it's not unheard of in, let's say, my broader circle of friends or professional network where people feel burned out or whatever. It's mainly because it's a new industry. It's been around. I think the most advancements have been for the last 20, 30 years, maybe 50 years. It is still very fast changing. We are all talking about brand new AI, which has come in last 6 months and is affecting almost 50% of white collar workers and so on and so forth. So when you are in a situation where you have this unknownness and there's so much information around you, you might find it harder to actually, let's say, might find it harder to disassociate yourself, or you basically say, okay, I'm going to work until 7 p.m. and then I'm going to take this time, go back to my family, and not really think about work. It's very hard, and you constantly might end up in this loop of there's this simmering problem solving or thinking or whatever you're doing in the back of your mind after your regular work hours, late in the night or early in the morning. And then that obviously adds to the stress and might lead to a potential risk of a burnout. And yes, that happens. I think it's largely personal and it's up to people how they manage it. Sometimes it could be systemic and some companies are known to be more hardworking and people tend to work longer hours and some are not. It totally depends on what type of employer one gets into.
What are some of the been the lessons that you've learned from the time you were a young man to the time that you are time now? How do you keep yourself mentally, physically healthy as a serial startup founder?
Yeah, because I'm in a unstructured or less structured startup ecosystem, it is stressful because I don't have this job security where I know my monthly paycheck is this is how much I make, and I'm going to get that check twice a month, no matter what, until I'm no longer in that job. But I don't have that level of security when you kind of start a startup, or even if you're a funded startup, you might have your pay set, but it's probably lower than the market, and so on and so forth. And you're committed to really prove your hypotheses in the market to your investors and customers. But essentially, to me, what works the best is just being realistic with yourself and then making sure I'm surrounded by the people I like to work with. So whether it's as a startup employee, whoever my boss is, whether it's the CEO of the company or when I was a mid-level manager, whether it's the VP of product or whatever, whoever is my manager, whether I really enjoy working with them and the rest of the team. And that kind of defines the culture, not just the bullet points on the wall of the company in terms of culture. Take that as a key input. Over the years, I value that much more than the work content itself or the topics that I'm working on. So that is a start because you're going to spend 8 to 10 hours every day, every single day with that team. And as a founder, if I'm with investors or whatever board of advisors I have, it's the same process where I'm choosing people who I enjoy working with. And so that handles much of it takes care of the pressure that you have on a day-to-day basis. In addition to that, I personally feel that taking 10 minutes off after every 2, 3 hours of calls or work sprints or whatever personal style is, I prefer to do 2 to 3 hours of work sprints, and it includes calls like this. And so you take the time off 10, 15 minutes in between, decompress. And then I truly believe in that research. I find it very useful that in that 10 minutes, I want to decompress where I want to do something which makes me somewhat happier, truly happy. I work from home. I have a collection of bonsais that I've created, the little trees I'm talking about. And so I'll just go and then spend 5 minutes with one pot, with one little plant. It just makes me happy. Or do something else which just makes me happy. Just go to my backyard with my dog and then see just be with my dog for 5 minutes. Just things which make you happy, especially in a work from home situation where you can do that. And that, I think, rebalances, it just brings the stress level down. And research supports that. If you're happier, you are able to manage stress much better. The body can cope much better. And then in terms of more commitment, I'm big on playing sports. So no matter what, I try to play 2 to 3 times some intense squash, and that just let go of any other physical and mental stress I have. Every 2 to 3 days, it just resets the body, and next morning it just feels so different after that activity. And I do that even when I am on a business travel. I would just go to San Francisco, or I was in Montreal a couple of weeks back. I'll just go to a new city and I'll make sure that I can go play my sport because it's very important part of my routine and keeping that balance.
That's incredible. I suppose that takes some planning ahead of time.
Yeah, it's like any other process. Like you try with 5 different avenues and one will work out. Right? Just like sales with my startup. It's like I might try a club or two and they'll be like, no, we don't allow strangers to drop by. Okay, let's try somebody else. Let's try somebody else. Yeah. Now I'm used to that process and it's a little bit of planning, probably 10, 15 minutes. But as long as since it is important to me, I like to do that. And as part of booking my air tickets or hotel or whatever, I would basically say one evening I want to really go play. I'm going to spend 4 days there, and that long enough break, it's going to be extra, I would say, busy because now you're doing your regular work in addition to some meetings or attending a conference or whatever. And I'll probably drink more, socialize more, and drink more for 2, 3 days. So why don't I just take one evening and spend 2 hours, which are really important to my mind and my body?
There's often a great pull because you mentioned here that you could go socialize, you go drink, you can go eat. How have you managed to implement productive activities that help you relax? Because I find that for a lot of business owners, where we really get into trouble is when we try to relax with something that has a net negative in our lives, whether that's over drinking, overeating, undereating, substance abuse, gambling, whatever it may be. How have you come to do something that's healthy for you versus perhaps some of those other activities that may feel good, but ultimately are not beneficial?
Yeah. So my keyword to that is balance. Now, let's say I just talked about squash as a sport, and if I overcome it and I'm playing every day, I'll definitely end up getting injured, and that's going to affect my work and family life and everything. And so the keyword is balance, even though it's a healthy activity. I don't want to become a gym rat and then say I'm going to spend 3 hours every day because that's how you relax. And same goes with, I'm not an expert I'm not a psychologist, but what I would basically say is that I would, I think the easiest way for me to find a balance is I try to net it out so it's on a daily basis, it's impossible. I might have a great party last night and I end up drinking a bit too much. But to me, now the balance is the 1 week ahead. So can I balance it off for the next few days? Maybe the next few days are also going to be something like that. Can I net it out and balance it off for that month? And so that's how I look at balance, which is you do go off balance and you're having, and I call it as a pleasure activity, right? So you're getting this short term pleasure on one specific evening by indulging in some great food. And then we all have our weaknesses when it comes to, like, really, let's say, sweets. And so I'm going to indulge on that one evening and it's fun. And then I know as part of the balance, I should avoid the same thing for the next 10 days. And then 11th day, I'm totally fine. And so if I look back in last 1 month, it balances out. And it applies to pretty much everything, in my opinion. That balance is the key. And to me, that's the long term strategy. You can keep rebalancing, and that's much easier. You can have one day where you are indulging in whatever, but then I need some self control after that for the next few days to just rebalance everything.
Talking about balance, as you strive to find that, what are some red flags or green flags that you can tell if you're off balance or if you're in balance? Because I think kind of that self awareness, it can sneak up on you. Sometimes it can sneak up on you before you realize that you're coming out of balance. So, what are some ways that you determine whether or not you need to go from one side or to the other?
Yeah, I think it's very personal. So if suppose I'm feeling tired at 1 p.m. on a given Wednesday, that's definitely is a red flag to me, as in there is something out of balance. Or it's one of those, sometimes you get into these, let's call it like the sales meetings, those client meetings, and there is one particular person or a couple of people who are saying few things that's not going to right or wrong, but I end up finding them annoying or their comments annoying. There's definitely something out of balance. There are these subtle things which will indicate to me that it's unbalanced. Like, why am I feeling that? Or there are bigger signs, which is if I have on a weekday, I have trouble getting up, or I have trouble going to my primary sporting activity or something. So these are all indicators of there is something bothering me, there is something out of balance. And so let's spend, I don't know, a few minutes to just fix that, be aware of that, and see if there is something that I can do to fix that. And I'm talking about more trivial stuff, I guess, at this point. And there are situations where you might end up in a much bigger imbalance. And so that might require some professional help. And that's totally, if I need that, then it's totally on me. Like I'm the best person to take care of myself. And so again, it's something important to be aware of. And I personally think it's a moving target for the right reason, not in terms of, it's a challenge, but yes, being in balance is always a moving target. I don't want to live like a monk, give up all pleasures in life, and we are probably always in balance. But none of us probably want that. And so in that case, this awareness, self-awareness of, do I need small adjustment and maybe not eat sweets for next 4 days? That's a little adjustment. Whereas I'm addicted to sugar, man. So I got to go and find some therapist to fix that is a bigger step to finding that balance. But it's totally on me to be aware of that and then find a solution.
I love a lot of these things that you're saying, that really becoming self-aware, and some of the red flags, being tired at 1 p.m., finding that you're abnormally irritable or you find people more annoying than usual are great red flags that just pay attention to. Now, I'd like to turn our conversation towards family and balance. You have two
Hmm.
daughters. What does balance look like for you in terms of time you spend at work versus time you spend with family? Talk to me a little bit how you have explored this area. What have you found successful? What have you found challenging?
Yeah. So to just share a little more context, I have a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old. So obviously their needs are both emotional and physical needs are quite different. What I find I'm most successful with, what I think it's most rewarding when it comes to finding that work family balance and so on, is the fact that it's always helpful if there is a bit of plan in terms of how's the day going to be or the week going to be. And are there any hot spots, as in there are some limitations that I'm going to have in this week. So for example, I'm traveling for a work conference. And so I'm not going to see them for 4 days. And so if that happens, then how do I want my next 2 days after I return to be so that I can be with my family, with my daughters? My wife also travels quite a bit. So the other important thing here is that travel for work. So the other important thing here is, how do we make sure that there are interactions which are just beyond transactions and we are able to, again, find time for each other. And essentially all of that is I'm not a super plan person, by the way. So I'm not going to be a very successful, let's say, a project manager who can really identify all the tasks and risks and dependencies. But at least intuitively and up to a certain level of detail, I'm able to force myself and say, okay. And then I do make mistakes, but I still want to be aware of, okay, so my older 12-year-old, she loves to play tennis. And she also lives with her mother, my ex-wife, and there is a shared schedule. So now, with all that considered, how do I make myself available, both mentally and physically? And then, in this case, conserve my energy for the day where she would love to play with me. She is a father's daughter. And so I want to have some energy left at the end of the day so that I can go and enjoy a good game of tennis with her. And she's getting good. So it's not just a 70-year-old playing where you're like, okay, whatever happens on the court. But if I'm going to perform poorly, she's not going to like it. So it does require a bit of this. I'm forgetting the name of the author, but the proponents of it's about managing your energy as opposed to time. I like that. I like that philosophy, which is I need to manage when I try to manage my energy along with time. But as much as there is energy left to do these key activities, then it makes total sense. Now, just to sum it up, when it comes to the 2-year-old, obviously her needs are quite different. And she'll go to bed at 7. I do have the benefit of working from home. So there's some flexibility where I can say, okay, I need to take a meeting between, let's say, 5:30 and 7, because that's the only time I might get with my little one. And so anything else that needs to happen, and typically when I work with the folks in the West Coast, because I'm on the East Coast, they are totally fine taking a call at 4 p.m. their time, which is 7 here. I'm like, okay, that's better than them setting a meeting between 5 and 7, which is middle of the day time for them. And so, again, some active planning and making sure that my priorities are set as much as possible. And again, it's not possible to do that 100% of the time, but as much as possible. And then B, just being transparent with people as well. This is my family, and I would want to keep this 90 minutes extra with my family. And most often people appreciate that.
Talk to me a little bit about that because a lot of the studies show that the CEO, the C-suite, the business leaders really set the tone for company culture about what's important, boundaries that you can set around personal and family life. Talk to me a little about your experience in letting your associates, your employees know the importance of spending time with your family.
Yeah. So as much as I can make references to our small team at StatsLateral or my previous startup ventures, teams smaller than 20 people, for example, in most of those cases, we end up knowing each other quite well. And most of our employees know what type of a family setup we have. And typically, we have followed the policy where obviously people can take time off as they need it for health reasons, for family reasons, whatever is needed. People are actually quite committed to also meeting their goals and objectives as opposed to just clocking the hours. We really discourage that type of a work culture. Actually, it's a misfit if somebody's just trying to do the job without worrying about the results and they're just working hard enough to say, I'm working 60 hours a day and that's what I'm supposed to do. But it doesn't fit with us. But to your point, if I am with a manager or a boss who has themselves have some level of imbalance with their family and that kind of becomes the culture, it's hopefully I don't want to choose a place like that to work. And it also depends on whether you're part of an organization where you tend to have a top-down culture, which I think is more traditional. Traditionally, businesses used to have a top-down culture. And in some places, it probably makes sense. I guess in army, it will make sense. And maybe in some other situations, it makes sense to have a top-down culture. But when I look at tech industry, very few sub-industries in tech may need a top-down culture. And typically, it's quite flat. So are given the choice of making their own decisions day to day. Again, focus on how they're going to contribute success. from their individual levels. And essentially, anybody who is in imbalance is largely a personal choice. But again, it's the responsibility of the leaders to make sure they're transparent about a balanced approach to work and family life. And I think as a business leader, I would try to be as transparent as possible and say it's important to have that balance. And that's definitely a winning long-term strategy. You can optimize and work like crazy for 6 months, but then maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. But it's not a long-term strategy. That's not the goal. It's not sustainable. And as a business leader, it's just important to be transparent about that. Even if I'm out of balance in a given month, I would still try to tell my team that, look, you don't have to. I am committed to doing something, and maybe I'm out of balance with my family for a few days, but you don't have to. That's not how we operate. That's not what we want to do. Maybe we are in a crunch time, so let's do it for 2 weeks. But beyond that, let's just make sure that we are able to spend quality time with our family as well.
It seems like if I can just repeat back some of the ideas that you're sharing, being really transparent, being self-aware, and really being able to communicate these different kind of seasons or periods of time that you're in is really crucial.
I agree.
One of the questions I always like asking near the end of these interviews is about success. In business, I feel like it's really easy to define success by looking at your KPIs, looking at your net income or net revenue, or maybe the valuation of your company. But it's a little more difficult to define what success looks like in the family. Would you mind sharing your thoughts on how you define success for your family and how do you measure that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very hard question. So I think the success starts with taking that to me, taking a self temperature and see, do I feel okay? And I don't need to be super happy every day. I think that's impractical. But at the same time, if I'm unhappy every day, that's also concerning. So my first step in terms of measuring my family success is, am I feeling okay? And I have my own like emotional baseline. And so based on that, I might have some stress points and so on and so forth, but am I okay? And then, are my children okay? Is my partner okay? Are my parents okay? And I think it's a very simple approach where I'm just taking that temperature, which is, yes, everybody has their own concerns, their own emotional baselines, and so on and so forth. But are they okay? We don't have any unusual struggles or something we really feel concerned about. If I look at children, are they largely able to do what they enjoy? My older one, if she likes academics, is she comfortable with that? And if she wants some help or attention from me or from somebody else, is she able to do that? She doesn't feel like it's all about books and she can't have fun on her iPhone. That's clearly should not be the case. So again, I think that understanding is driven by just taking first the self temperature and then making sure that the family members, each family member's temperature is okay. And then at the end of the day, it's like I don't have to be the secret sort of, I would say, amateur psychologist, but it's essentially just having that conversation, which is I do ask my 12-year-old and say, hey, you okay? Do you need anything? Do you want to hang out? Or are you comfortable with maybe your homework or your last tennis game that you lost? All of that. And it's in a way motivates her to take her own temperature and share that information with me. And then that's a very important output. Same thing goes with, can't do the 2-year-old, but same thing goes with my partner, with my wife, and say, oh, how are you feeling? You traveled. What do you need? And so there is definitely a certain level of empathy and so on. But that feedback is important to me for families' health, mainly because my My baseline for empathy is different from you or from somebody else. And the more information, or at least the basic information I have, and regularly I'm able to get that information, I'm able to take that temperature and say, okay, you know what, the family is doing okay. We don't need to do great every single day. That's impractical. We don't need to have a blast every day. It never happens like that. So that's how I approach it.
One final question. One of our previous guests that was on was talking about kind of this idea that to be super successful, let's say to be a Jeff Bezos or to be Elon Musk, it's not possible to be that successful and to have a super successful family. How would you respond to that idea?
I don't know. The part of the comment is probably just the numbers game of Fortune publishing how much a person is worth in terms of dollars. And I guess that's what I'm hearing from you. But the whole idea is that families is it's just that. I'm not sure what's the baseline of happiness or unhappiness for a billionaire. I'm not one of them. In my experience, I've seen several low income families in India and in the US who seem to be extremely happy. And at the same time, I have seen a few well to do families who are not so happy. And so I don't think these are correlated. The bigger question to me is, do you want a happy family? Do you care about it? And some people may have a different viewpoint on it, and that's totally fine. And some people really spend a lot of time to make sure that their family is happy. And for that matter, they may not seem as ambitious as compared to some of these household names. And that's fine. It's a very personal question. It's a highly personal choice.
Yeah.
And so what matters to me most is, again, it's like, would my startup ever be a $1 billion startup? Maybe not. It has nothing to do with my family happiness. Yes, there will be some conveniences. If you have more wealth, you can buy some more convenience. But would that be the only criteria to be happy? No. On the other hand, I do know the practical side of such comments where if you're not able to provide decent healthcare because of lack of means or education and so on, yes, that does make you less happy or maybe unhappy. And that's a practical reality.
Shikhin, I really appreciate your willingness to come on the show to share your thoughts about balance, about family success, and just generally your overall experience in establishing a healthy culture in your startups. Thank you so much for your time and the wisdom that you've shared today.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope this is meaningful and it adds value to what you're working on. I appreciate all the hard work that you're putting for it.
Appreciate it so much. Everyone, again, this is Shikhin Argawal, founder and CEO of StatsLateral. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, and we will see you all on the next show.